Chapter 1. The fall, the eviction notice trembled in Sophia Chen's hands, like a death sentence written on cheap legal paper. 30 days. She stared at the bold black letters until they blurred, her breath coming in sharp, shallow bursts that fogged the October air outside her soon-to-be former apartment building. The paper crumpled as her fingers tightened involuntarily, and she almost laughed at the irony. She couldn't even afford to be careless with documents anymore. "Miss Chen?" The landlord's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. "I know this is difficult, but the bank's been very clear. Without the back rent, I understand." The words came out steadier than she felt. Professional, controlled, everything she'd learned to be during her brief, shining career at Morrison & Associates before her world imploded. "Thank you for the extension you've already given me. Thank you for letting me drown slowly, instead of pushing me under all at once." She folded the notice with mechanical precision and slipped it into her worn leather portfolio, the one designer item she hadn't sold yet, because even desperation had its limits. Some things were too tangled up in who she used to be. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps as Sophia made her way down to the street, her heels clicking against stone like a countdown. Each step took her further from the person she'd been 6 months ago. Harvard law graduate, rising associate, daughter who made her immigrant parents proud. Each step brought her closer to a truth she'd been running from since the scandal broke. She was going to lose everything. Her phone buzzed. Another creditor, probably. Or maybe the collection agency that had been calling about her student loans. She'd stopped answering unknown numbers weeks ago, but they kept trying. Kept circling like vultures who could smell her desperation from miles away. The message wasn't from a creditor. Final interview today. Morrison Industries 47th floor. 4:30 p.m. Don't be late. Janet Sophia's heart stuttered. She'd almost forgotten about the executive assistant position Janet had mentioned. A last-ditch favor from her former colleague who'd escaped the Morrison & Associates collapse unscathed. A job that would pay barely a third of what she'd made as a lawyer, but still, a job. She glanced at her watch. 4:15 p.m. Morrison Industries occupied the top 15 floors of the Pinnacle Tower, a gleaming monument to wealth and power that pierced the Seattle skyline like a steel and glass blade. Sophia had walked past it countless times during her old life, never imagining she'd one day be desperate enough to beg for scraps from its table. The elevator ride to the 47th floor felt like ascending to another planet. Each floor that flashed by on the digital display marked another level of separation from her reality, from eviction, notices and ramen dinners and the growing pile of rejection letters on her kitchen counter. The reception area was all marble and understated luxury, the kind of space designed to make visitors feel simultaneously impressed and insignificant. Behind the polished desk sat a woman who looked like she'd been carved from the same expensive stone as the building itself. "Sophia Chen," she said, approaching the desk with what she hoped was confidence and not desperation. "I have an interview at 4:30. The receptionist's smile was glacial. "Mr. Morrison is running behind schedule. Please take a seat." Sophia perched on the edge of a leather chair that probably cost more than her monthly rent, back when she could pay rent, and tried not to think about how much this job meant. How it was quite literally the difference between surviving and not. "Miss Chen." A crisp voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. "Mr. Morrison will see you now." The office beyond the double doors was a study in controlled power. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the city, while dark wood and steel created an atmosphere that felt more like a war room than a workplace. And behind the massive desk, reviewing what looked like a contract with laser focus, sat the most dangerous man Sophia had ever seen. Adrian Morrison didn't look up immediately, and somehow that made his presence even more overwhelming. Dark hair, sharp jawline, expensive suit that fit like armor. When he finally raised his eyes, Sophia felt the full weight of his attention like a physical force. Gray eyes. Cold as winter steel, and just as unforgiving. "Miss Chen." His voice was deep, measured, with an edge that suggested he didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Sit." Not a request, a command. Sophia sat, spine straight, chin up, even as something deep in her chest fluttered with warning. This wasn't just an interview. This felt like standing trial. Your resume is interesting. He opened a folder, her folder, with movements that were economical and precise. Harvard Law, top 10% of your class, fast track to partnership at Morrison & Associates. His gaze flicked up to hers, and she saw something that might have been amusement in those cold depths. Until the embezzlement scandal, of course. Heat flooded her cheeks, but she held his stare. I was cleared of all charges. Cleared, yes, but not unscathed. He leaned back in his chair, studying her like she was a problem to be solved. Tell me, Miss Chen, why would a former attorney want to work as an executive assistant? The truth sat heavy in her throat. Because I'm desperate. Because I have $17 in my checking account and nowhere else to go. Because you're my last option before I lose everything. Instead, she said, I believe this position would allow me to utilize my organizational skills while exploring new aspects of corporate law. His laugh was low and completely without humor. That's corporate speak for I'm desperate. Try again. The words hit her like a slap, all the more stinging because they were true. But something in his tone, the casual cruelty of it, sparked a flame of anger in her chest. You're right, she said, leaning forward slightly. I am desperate, but I'm also qualified, hardworking, and have nothing left to lose. That makes me either the worst possible hire or the best. Which one depends entirely on what you're really looking for. For a long moment, he simply stared at her. Then, slowly, his mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, but was far more dangerous. Interesting, he murmured, closing her file with a soft snap. The position comes with certain requirements. Irregular hours. Complete discretion. Absolute loyalty. His gray eyes never left hers. And you would be working very closely with me. Are you prepared for that level of intensity, Miss Chen? There was something in his tone that made her pulse quicken, though she couldn't say why. Something that suggested this job interview had just become something else entirely. I can handle intensity, she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. He stood then, moving around the desk with predatory grace, and suddenly the office felt much smaller, much more dangerous. Can you? He stopped just close enough that she caught a hint of his cologne. Expensive, masculine, overwhelming. Because if you take this position, your life becomes mine. Your time, your energy, your complete attention. I don't accept half measures or excuses. I don't tolerate failure. He was trying to intimidate her, she realized, testing her limits, seeing if she would break. She stood as well, meeting his gaze even though it required tilting her head back. Even though standing brought her close enough to see the flecks of silver in those gray eyes, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. Then I suppose you'll have to decide if you think I'm worth the risk, she said quietly. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or approval. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, holding it just out of her reach. Be here Monday morning at 6 a.m. Sharp. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Don't disappoint me, Miss Chen. I don't give second chances. She took the card, their fingers brushing for just an instant. The contact sent a jolt of electricity up her arm that she absolutely could not afford to acknowledge. I won't, she promised, though she wasn't entirely sure what she was promising anymore. As she walked toward the elevator on unsteady legs, one thought echoed in her mind with crystalline clarity. She'd just made a deal with the devil himself. And God help her, she was grateful for it. Chapter 2. The deal Monday morning arrived like a reckoning. Sophia stood outside the Pinnacle Tower at 5:45 a.m., nursing a cup of gas station coffee that tasted like regret, and watching the city wake up around her. The pre-dawn streets were empty, except for maintenance crews and the occasional taxi carrying someone home from a night she couldn't afford to imagine having. She'd spent the weekend in a strange limbo between hope and terror. Hope, because Adrian Morrison's business card represented salvation, a lifeline thrown to someone drowning in debt and desperation. Terror, because something about their encounter had felt less like a job interview and more like a predator circling prey. Your life becomes mine. The words had echoed in her head all weekend, along with the memory of his gray eyes and the way he'd moved around that desk, like he owned not just the building, but everything in it, including her. At exactly 5:58 a.m., she entered the lobby. The security guard barely glanced at her ID before waving her through. Clearly, Adrian Morrison's new employees were expected. The elevator ride to the 47th floor felt different this time. Less like ascending to another world, more like walking into a trap she'd set for herself. The reception area was dark except for security lighting, but a soft glow emanated from the direction of Adrian's office. Of course he was already here. Men like Adrian Morrison didn't get to the top by keeping normal hours. She knocked softly on his door. Enter. He was standing by the windows, silhouetted against the city lights like some dark angel surveying his domain. He didn't turn when she entered, but his voice cut through the silence with surgical precision. "You're 3 minutes early." "Good." He turned then, and she was struck again by how commanding his presence was, how the expensive suit couldn't quite hide the predatory grace beneath. "Coffee's on the credenza. You'll need it." Sophia moved to pour herself a cup, hyper-aware of his eyes tracking her every movement. The coffee was perfect. Rich, hot, probably cost more per pound than she'd spent on groceries in the last month. "Thank you," she said, wrapping her fingers around the warm mug like armor. "Don't thank me yet." He moved to his desk, pulling out a thick document. "Before we begin, there are terms to discuss. Conditions." Something cold settled in her stomach. "What kind of conditions?" "The kind that ensure complete discretion and absolute loyalty." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit, again, not a request." She sat. He placed the document in front of her. Easily 30 pages of dense legal text. Her lawyer training kicked in automatically, eyes scanning the first page. Non-disclosure agreement. Non-compete clause. Morality standards. "This is more comprehensive than most marriage contracts," she said, looking up at him. His smile was sharp as a blade. "In some ways, it's more binding." She turned the page, her blood growing colder with each clause. Complete availability during business hours and reasonably required overtime. No romantic relationships without prior approval. No public statements or social media posts regarding Morrison Industries or Adrian Morrison without express written consent. Prior approval for romantic relationships. She looked up at him, incredulous. "You can't be serious." Deadly serious. He leaned back in his chair, studying her reaction like a scientist observing an experiment. "My business dealings require the utmost discretion. I can't have my executive assistant's personal life creating complications or security risks. This isn't a job contract. It's indentured servitude. It's necessity." His voice went cold, dangerous. "I told you Friday that your life becomes mine if you take this position." "I meant it literally." Sophia set down her coffee cup before her shaking hands could betray her. "And if I refuse?" "Then you walk away. No harm, no foul." He leaned forward, predatory focus sharpening. "But we both know you won't refuse, don't we, Miss Chen?" The casual cruelty of it stole her breath. He knew exactly how desperate she was, knew she had no other options, and he was using that knowledge like a weapon. "There's something else," he continued, pulling out another document. "This position requires certain public appearances, charity galas, business dinners, industry events. You'll need to look the part." The second contract was shorter but somehow more ominous. Personal styling allowance, wardrobe requirements, public behavior guidelines. "You want to dress me up like a doll," she said flatly. "I want you to represent my company appropriately." His gray eyes never left hers. "Image matters in my world, Miss Chen. Perception is reality. And reality is that my executive assistant reflects directly on me." She stared at the contracts, her legal training warring with her desperation. Every clause was designed to give him complete control over her life. What she wore, who she dated, what she said, where she went. It was comprehensive domination disguised as employment terms. "The salary," she said finally. "What's the actual number?" He named a figure that made her head spin. It was more than she'd made as a lawyer, more than she'd ever imagined making. Enough to pay off her debts, save her apartment, maybe even start rebuilding her life. Enough to make her forget about dignity and self-respect. Plus benefits, he continued, watching her face carefully. Health insurance, dental, vision, performance bonuses, and a signing bonus of $50,000. Deposited today, upon contract execution. $50,000. Today. Sophia closed her eyes, thinking of the eviction notice folded in her purse, of the student loan payments she'd missed, of her parents' disappointed faces when she'd finally confessed how far she'd fallen. When she opened her eyes, Adrian was still watching her with that predatory intensity. "Why?" she asked. "Why me? You could have anyone. Someone with more experience, better connections, fewer complications." For a moment, something flickered across his features. Something almost human. "Because," he said quietly, "I need someone who understands desperation, someone who knows what it's like to lose everything." His voice hardened again. "Someone who won't betray me because they literally can't afford to." The honesty was brutal and perfect. He wasn't pretending this was anything other than what it was, a transaction born of mutual need. His need for absolute control, her need for survival. "If I sign this," she said carefully, "what happens to me? I mean, really happens? You become indispensable to me. You learn my business, my secrets, my weaknesses." His smile was cold as winter. "And I learn yours." A shiver ran down her spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "The contracts are non-negotiable," he added. "Sign them as written, or don't sign them at all." Sophia picked up the pen he'd placed beside the documents. It was heavy, expensive, probably worth more than her weekly grocery budget. Her hand trembled slightly as she poised it over the signature line. This was it. The moment she traded her freedom for financial security. The moment she accepted that survival sometimes required surrendering everything you thought you were. She thought of her empty apartment, her maxed-out credit cards, the phone calls she'd stopped answering. She thought of her parents' faces when she told them she'd found a good job. She thought of being able to sleep at night without calculating how many days she had left before losing everything. Then, she thought of Adrian Morrison's gray eyes and the way he'd said your life becomes mine like it was already an accomplished fact. She signed her name with swift, decisive strokes. Both contracts. Every page. Every clause that stripped away another piece of her autonomy. When she finished, Adrian reached across the desk and took the documents. His fingers brushed hers, just for an instant, and that same electric shock from Friday shot through her system. "Congratulations, Miss Chen," he said, his voice carrying a note of something that might have been satisfaction or possession. "You now work for me." He stood and moved to a wall safe hidden behind what looked like abstract art. A moment later, he returned with a cashier's check and placed it in front of her. $50,000. Made out to Sophia Chen, real, tangible, life-saving. "Your first assignment," he said, settling back into his chair like a king on his throne, "is to attend the Morrison Industries charity gala this Saturday, 7 p.m. at the Four Seasons. Black tie. I don't have anything appropriate for you do now." He slid another business card across the desk. "Vivienne Laurent, personal stylist. Appointment tomorrow at 10 a.m. Everything will be charged to the company account." Of course it would be, because now her appearance belonged to him too. "Is there anything else?" she asked, standing on legs that felt steadier now that financial security was literally in her hands. His smile was dangerous and knowing. "Oh, Miss Chen," he said softly, "we're just getting started." As she walked toward the elevator with the check burning like fire in her purse, one thought crystallized in her mind. She'd just sold her soul to the devil. The terrifying part was how good it felt to finally have a buyer. Chapter 3. Into his world. The boutique on Fifth Avenue looked like a temple to wealth. All marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and displays that showcased single dresses like priceless artifacts. Sophia hesitated at the entrance, suddenly acutely aware of her discount store blazer and scuffed shoes. A woman emerged from the depths of the store like a vision of sophisticated perfection. Tall, elegant, with silver hair pulled into a flawless chignon, and eyes that catalogued Sophia's appearance in one sweeping glance. "Miss Chen, I presume?" Her accent was faintly European, her smile professionally warm. "I am Vivienne Laurent. Mr. Morrison has told me so much about you." What exactly had he told her? "Please come." Vivienne gestured toward the back of the boutique. "We have much work to do." The private styling suite was larger than Sophia's apartment, with floor-to-ceiling mirrors, plush seating, and racks of clothing that looked like they belonged in a museum. A bottle of champagne sat chilling in an ice bucket beside a selection of pastries that probably cost more than her weekly grocery budget. "First," Vivienne said, circling Sophia like a sculptor studying raw marble, "we must understand what Mr. Morrison requires. Requires, not wants. Not prefers. Requires." "He mentioned black tie for Saturday night," Sophia offered. "Oh, darling, Saturday is just the beginning." Vivian's smile was knowing. Mr. Morrison's companion must be prepared for every eventuality. Board meetings, charity luncheons, private dinners with international clients. You will be seen, photographed, judged. She paused meaningfully. You will be a reflection of his taste, his success, his power. The word companion sent a chill down Sophia's spine. "I'm his executive assistant." "Of course you are." Vivian's tone suggested she'd heard that particular fiction before. "Now let us begin with measurements." The next 3 hours were a blur of silk and cashmere, Italian leather and French lace. Vivian draped Sophia in fabrics that felt like liquid luxury, transforming her from desperate attorney to something else entirely, someone else entirely. "Exquisite," Vivian murmured, adjusting the drape of a midnight blue gown that clung to Sophia's curves like it had been painted on. "Mr. Morrison has excellent taste in women." "He doesn't have taste in women," Sophia said quickly. "This is purely professional." Vivian's laugh was like silver bells. "Darling, nothing about Adrian Morrison is purely professional. That man doesn't breathe without calculating the strategic advantage." Before Sophia could process that statement, Vivian was already pulling another creation from the rack, a black cocktail dress that managed to be both modest and devastating. "Try this. It's perfect for your first public appearance with him." First public appearance, as if there would be many more. The dress fit like a second skin, transforming her reflection into someone she barely recognized. Someone who belonged in Adrian Morrison's world of power and privilege. "Now," Vivian said, producing a selection of jewelry that probably cost more than Sophia's law school tuition. Accessories. "Mr. Morrison has very specific preferences." She fastened a diamond necklace around Sophia's throat. Delicate. Elegant. But somehow it felt more like a collar than jewelry. A beautiful, expensive symbol of ownership. "Perfect," Vivian breathed. "He will be very pleased." The afternoon dissolved into a montage of alterations and selections, shoes and bags, even lingerie that made Sophia blush furiously. Everything would be delivered to her apartment by Thursday, Vivian assured her, along with a detailed guide for each outfit's appropriate occasion. "One more thing," Vivian said as they concluded. She handed Sophia an elegant card. "Hair and makeup Friday at 2 p.m. They will come to you." "All of this seems excessive for an executive assistant," Sophia said, though even as she spoke, she was running her fingers over the silk of a blouse that felt like heaven. "Excessive?" Vivian's eyebrows rose. "Darling, you clearly don't understand the role you've accepted." She moved closer, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper. "Adrian Morrison doesn't simply hire executive assistants. He acquires them, and what he acquires, he transforms to suit his exact specifications." The word sent ice through Sophia's veins. "What do you mean, acquires?" But Vivian was already moving away, her attention shifting to packing the immediate necessities. "You'll understand soon enough. They all do. They all do." How many women had stood in this exact spot, been measured and fitted and transformed for Adrian Morrison's purposes? Sophia left the boutique with a garment bag containing her Saturday night gown, and a growing sense that she'd stepped into something far more complex than a simple employment arrangement. The city streets felt different somehow, sharper, more dangerous, full of people who moved with purpose she couldn't fathom. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Hope the appointment went well. See you tomorrow at 7 a.m. Adrian." He'd given her his personal number. and somehow that felt more intimate than all the expensive clothes and jewelry combined. She was still staring at the message when another text arrived. Wear the gray suit. The one with the pencil skirt? Sophia stopped walking. How did he know what she'd selected? Had Vivian reported back to him already? Of course she had. Everything in Adrian Morrison's world served his purposes, including the woman who'd just spent 3 hours outfitting his latest acquisition. Acquisition. The word echoed in her mind as she climbed the stairs to her apartment, the garment bag feeling heavier with each step. Inside her small space, which now felt impossibly cramped after the luxury of the boutique, she hung the gown carefully in her closet. The midnight blue silk looked alien among her discount store clothing, like an exotic bird caged with sparrows. She poured herself a glass of cheap wine and sank onto her second-hand couch, staring at the check that still sat on her coffee table. $50,000. Real money. Life-changing money. But at what cost? Her phone rang. Adrian's number. Hello? Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Sophia. The sound of her name in his deep voice sent an unwelcome shiver through her. How was your afternoon with Vivian? Educational. She took a sip of wine, needing the liquid courage. She seems to think I'm more than just your executive assistant. His laugh was low, dangerous. Vivian has a flair for drama. Don't let her romanticize what this is. And what is this, exactly? A pause, long enough for her pulse to quicken. Necessity, he said finally. On both our parts. Before she could respond, he continued. I'm sending a car for you tomorrow morning. 6:30 a.m. I can take the bus? No. The word was absolute. My assistant doesn't take public transportation. Image matters, Sophia. Everything you do reflects on me now. Everything you do. Another reminder that her life was no longer her own. Understood, she said quietly. Good. Wear the gray suit. And Sophia? Yes? Don't disappoint me. The line went dead, leaving her staring at the phone and wondering what fresh hell tomorrow would bring. Outside her window, Seattle glittered with lights that seemed impossibly distant, like stars in a universe she no longer belonged to. In 12 hours, she'd step into Adrian Morrison's world completely. No more pretending this was just a job. No more clinging to the illusion that she had any power in their arrangement. She was his now, bought and paid for, dressed and styled to his exact specifications. The terrifying part wasn't how trapped she felt. The terrifying part was how much she was looking forward to seeing the approval in those cold gray eyes when he realized how perfectly she'd been transformed into exactly what he wanted. Chapter 4. The mask slips. The black town car that arrived at 6:30 a.m. was a testament to understated luxury. Leather seats that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, and a driver who nodded respectfully when she gave her name. As they glided through Seattle's morning traffic, Sophia caught herself checking her reflection in the tinted windows. The gray suit fit like it had been made for her body specifically, which she supposed it had. The pencil skirt hugged her curves while the blazer created clean, professional lines. Vivian had been right about the transformation being complete. The woman in the reflection looked like she belonged in Adrian Morrison's world. The question was whether the woman beneath the designer clothes could survive it. The elevator ride to the 47th floor felt different this time, familiar, as if she was returning home rather than entering foreign territory. The thought disturbed her more than she cared to admit. Adrian's office door was open when she arrived, and she could hear his voice, cold, clipped, utterly ruthless, as he spoke into his phone. I don't care what the Tokyo office thinks is reasonable. The acquisition happens on my timeline, or it doesn't happen at all. A pause. Then they can explain to their shareholders why they chose to lose $12 billion over their pride. Sophia hesitated in the doorway, watching him pace behind his desk like a caged predator. The morning light streaming through the windows turned his dark hair almost black and cast sharp shadows across his angular features. He looked dangerous, powerful, completely in control. He looked up and saw her, and something flickered across his expression, too quick to identify, but it made her pulse skip. Handle it, he said into the phone, his eyes never leaving hers. And Marcus, next time someone questions my methods, remind them what happened to the last company that tried to play games with me. He ended the call and set the phone down with deliberate precision. "You look..." He paused, his gray gaze traveling slowly from her face down to her shoes and back up. "Perfect." The single word hit her like a physical caress, sending warmth flooding through her chest. She'd been aiming for professional competence, but the way he said perfect made it sound like something else entirely. "Thank you," she managed. "Coffee's ready. Black, no sugar." He gestured toward the credenza. "You'll need the caffeine. We have a full day ahead of us." As she poured the coffee, she felt his attention like heat against her back. When she turned, he was still watching her with that predatory intensity that made her feel like prey that had wandered willingly into the hunter's territory. "Your first real assignment," he said, settling into his chair. "Review these." He placed a stack of contracts on the desk between them. "Look for weaknesses, loopholes, anything that could be used against us. Your legal training wasn't just decorative, I assume. The contracts were complex merger documents, the kind of high-stakes legal work she'd dreamed of handling when she was still naive enough to believe merit mattered more than connections." She settled into the chair across from his desk and began reading, falling into the familiar rhythm of analyzing legal language. For 2 hours, they worked in companionable silence. Adrian handled phone calls and emails while Sophia dissected contract language, making notes in the margins with a precision that felt like muscle memory. It was almost normal, professional, easy, which should have been her first warning. "Find anything interesting?" he asked, looking up from his laptop. "Section 12 of the Morrison-Hartley merger has a termination clause that could be problematic," she said, sliding the document across to him. "If Hartley's board changes their minds about the deal, they can walk away with minimal penalties as long as they cite material changes in market conditions." Adrian's eyebrows rose as he scanned her notes. "That's very good. My legal team missed that entirely." The approval in his voice sent another unwelcome flush of warmth through her. She was supposed to be his employee, not a puppy desperate for his praise. "It's a common oversight," she said, trying to sound detached. "Easy to miss if you're not looking for it specifically. And you were looking for it specifically because that's exactly the kind of clause I would have inserted if I were representing the other side." She met his gaze steadily. Sometimes the best way to find traps is to think like the person setting them. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. For a moment, the cold mask he wore slipped just enough for her to glimpse something almost human beneath. "Interesting philosophy," he said quietly. "Do you think like the person setting traps often, Sophia?" The way he said her name, soft, almost intimate, made her breath catch. There was something in his tone that suggested he wasn't talking about contracts anymore. "When I have to," she said carefully. He leaned forward, his attention suddenly focused on her with laser intensity. "And do you have to? With me?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications she wasn't ready to examine. Was he asking if she trusted him? If she was planning to betray him? Or something else entirely? "I don't know yet," she answered honestly. His laugh was low, genuinely amused. Most people would have lied, said they trusted me completely, or that they'd never dream of setting traps. Most people probably haven't read their employment contracts as thoroughly as I have. Another flash of that almost smile. "Touché." His phone buzzed, and he glanced at it with a frown. "My mother," he said, and something in his voice shifted, became guarded, defensive. "She wants to meet you." "Meet me? Why?" "Because Eleanor Morrison has made it her life's mission to interfere in mine." He stood abruptly, moving to the windows. "She heard I'd hired a new assistant and apparently has opinions about my choices." There was tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there moments before, a tightness around his eyes that suggested this was more complicated than simple maternal concern. "What kind of opinions?" Sophia asked. "The kind that involve lunch reservations at her country club and pointed questions about your background, your intentions, and your relationship status." He turned back to her, and for just an instant, she saw something vulnerable in his expression. "She destroys people she considers threats to the Morrison legacy. And she considers me a threat? She considers any woman in my vicinity a potential threat. especially one she hasn't personally vetted and approved. His smile was sharp as broken glass. My mother has very specific ideas about the kind of woman who belongs in our family. Our family. The word sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with temperature. I'm your executive assistant, she said firmly. Nothing more. Try telling her that. He moved back to his desk, but there was restless energy in his movements now, like a caged animal sensing danger. She'll take one look at you in that suit and draw her own conclusions. What conclusions? He stopped moving, his gray eyes finding hers. That I chose you for reasons that have nothing to do with your professional qualifications. The implication hit her like a slap. Heat flooded her cheeks and she stood abruptly. I should go update those contracts. Sophia. His voice stopped her before she could take a step toward the door. Did I choose you for reasons that have nothing to do with your professional qualifications? She turned slowly, finding him watching her with that predatory intensity again. But now there was something else in his expression, a kind of raw honesty that made her chest tight. I don't know, she said quietly. Did you? For a long moment, they simply stared at each other across the expensive office. The air between them felt charged, dangerous, full of possibilities that could destroy them both. Then his phone rang, shattering the moment like glass. He answered without breaking eye contact. Morrison. Sophia couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but she watched his expression harden back into that familiar cold mask. Fine, he said finally. Thursday at noon. But Mother, if you make her uncomfortable, this arrangement ends immediately. He hung up and looked at her with something that might have been regret. Thursday lunch, he said. The country club. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. I can handle your mother. His smile was sharp and dangerous and somehow proud. I'm beginning to think you can handle anything. Sophia Chen. As she walked back to her temporary desk outside his office, one thought echoed in her mind. For just a moment, she'd seen behind Adrian Morrison's mask, and what she'd found there was far more terrifying than his cold control. She'd found a man who might actually be falling for his own charade. Chapter 5. The setup, the Morrison Industries Charity Gala, was a lesson in power disguised as philanthropy. Sophia stood in the marble-clad lobby of the Four Seasons, watching Seattle's elite Air Kiss and network, while a string quartet played softly in the background. The midnight blue gown Vivian had selected transformed her into someone who belonged in this world of understated luxury and carefully calculated generosity. She just wished she felt as confident as she looked. Breathe. Adrian's voice came low and warm beside her ear, his hand settling at the small of her back. You look like you're about to face a firing squad. The casual intimacy of his touch sent electricity racing up her spine. Over the past 3 days, he'd been nothing but professional. Distant, controlled, every interaction carefully managed. But now, with his palm pressed against the silk of her dress, she could feel the heat of his skin through the fabric. Maybe because I am, she murmured back, acutely aware of the curious glances they were drawing. Half these people probably read about the Morrison and Associates scandal. Let them look. His fingers pressed slightly against her back, possessive and reassuring at once. You're with me now. That's all that matters. You're with me now. The words sent a dangerous flutter through her chest that had nothing to do with the champagne she'd barely touched. Adrian, a woman's voice cut through the ambient noise like a blade wrapped in silk. There you are, darling. Sophia turned to see a vision of polished perfection approaching. Tall, blonde, draped in diamonds that probably cost more than most people's houses. Her smile was radiant and sharp enough to cut glass. Victoria, Adrian said, and something in his voice went cold. I wasn't expecting to see you here. Oh, you know me. I never could resist a good cause. Victoria's blue eyes shifted to Sophia with predatory interest. And you must be the new assistant everyone's talking about. The word assistant dripped with subtle condescension, but Victoria's smile never wavered. Sophia Chen. Sophia extended her hand, keeping her voice pleasant and professional. Victoria Pemberton. The handshake lasted exactly long enough to be polite, and not a second more. Adrian and I have such a long history together. Don't we, darling? Adrian's hand tightened almost imperceptibly against Sophia's back. Ancient history, is it? Victoria's laugh was like crystal breaking. I seem to remember you saying some rather passionate things about our future together. Right before you decided business was more important than love, the barb hit its mark. Sophia felt Adrian go rigid beside her, saw something flash across his expression that looked almost like pain. If you'll excuse us, he said coolly, we should find our table. But Victoria wasn't finished. Of course, though I do hope your assistant understands what she's getting into. Adrian has such specific requirements for the women in his life. Her smile turned predatory. Don't you, darling? Before Adrian could respond, another voice joined the conversation. Victoria, still causing trouble wherever you go. I see. Sophia turned to see a distinguished older woman approaching, silver-haired and elegant, with Adrian's gray eyes and the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it. Mrs. Morrison. Victoria's voice went carefully neutral. How lovely to see you. I'm sure it is. Eleanor Morrison's tone was arctic. Though I'm surprised to see you here given your recent financial difficulties. Victoria's perfect composure cracked just slightly. I'm sure I don't know what you mean. Don't you? How interesting. Eleanor's attention shifted to Sophia, and those gray eyes, so like Adrian's, studied her with laser focus. And you must be Miss Chen. I've been looking forward to meeting you. The pleasure is mine, Mrs. Morrison, Sophia said, grateful that her voice came out steady. Is it? Eleanor's smile was enigmatic. We shall see. Adrian, dear, might I borrow Miss Chen for a moment? There are some people I'd like her to meet. It wasn't really a request, and they all knew it. Adrian's hand dropped from Sophia's back, but not before she felt his reluctance in the gesture. Of course, he said, his voice carefully neutral. I'll find our table. As Eleanor led her away, Sophia caught a glimpse of Victoria moving closer to Adrian, her hand touching his arm with familiar intimacy. The sight sent an unexpected spike of jealousy through her chest. Ignore her, Eleanor said quietly, apparently reading her expression. Victoria Pemberton is a parasite who feeds on other people's success. She had her chance with my son and squandered it. They approached a cluster of impeccably dressed people who turned toward them with the kind of calculated attention that meant money and influence were at stake. Everyone. I'd like you to meet Sophia Chen, Adrian's new executive assistant. Eleanor's voice carried clearly, and Sophia didn't miss the way several pairs of eyes sharpened with interest. For the next 20 minutes, she was introduced to senators and CEOs, tech moguls and philanthropists. Each conversation was a careful dance of assessment. They were trying to determine her importance in Adrian's world, her potential influence, whether she was worth cultivating or dismissing. Through it all, Eleanor watched her with those penetrating gray eyes, clearly conducting her own evaluation. You handle yourself well, Eleanor said finally, when they'd extracted themselves from the latest group, better than most of Adrian's employees. The pause before employees was deliberate and loaded with meaning. Thank you, Sophia said carefully. Tell me, Miss Chen, what are your intentions regarding my son? The directness of the question caught Sophia off guard. I'm sorry? Don't play naive with me, dear. It doesn't suit you. Eleanor's smile was sharp as a blade. Adrian doesn't hire executive assistants who look like you unless he has plans that extend far beyond filing and scheduling. So I'll ask again, what are your intentions? Heat flooded Sophia's cheeks. Mrs. Morrison, I assure you, our relationship is strictly professional. Is it? Eleanor's eyebrows rose. Because from where I stand, it looks like my son is more interested in you than he's been in any woman since Victoria destroyed his ability to trust. The words hit Sophia like a physical blow. Since Victoria destroyed his ability to trust. I don't understand. Eleanor's expression softened slightly, though her eyes remained sharp. Victoria was Adrian's first love. First everything, really. He would have given her the world if she'd asked. Instead, she chose to sell his business secrets to his biggest competitor in exchange for a more lucrative marriage proposal. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Adrian's need for absolute loyalty, his comprehensive contracts, His comment about needing someone who understood desperation because they literally couldn't afford to betray him. "He doesn't know that I know," Eleanor continued quietly, "but I've watched my son turn himself into ice because he believes love is just another transaction waiting to go wrong." Her gaze sharpened on Sophia's face. "The question is, Miss Chen, are you here to prove him right or wrong?" Before Sophia could answer, a familiar voice interrupted. "Mother, I hope you're not interrogating my assistant." Adrian appeared beside them, handsome and commanding in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, but Sophia could see the tension in his shoulders, the careful control in his expression. "Just getting acquainted, dear," Eleanor said smoothly. "Miss Chen is delightful. You chose well." Something passed between mother and son, a look loaded with years of history and unspoken understanding. "The auction's about to start," Adrian said, offering Sophia his arm. "Shall we?" As they walked toward their table, Sophia's mind raced with everything Eleanor had revealed. Victoria's betrayal, Adrian's destroyed trust, the realization that she might be part of some larger test or game she didn't understand. "What did she say to you?" Adrian asked quietly as they took their seats. Sophia looked up at him, seeing him with new eyes. The cold control wasn't just personality, it was armor. Protection against another Victoria, another betrayal, another woman who would sell his secrets for the right price. "She told me about Victoria," she said softly. His entire body went rigid. "What about Victoria?" "Everything." She met his gaze steadily. "About the betrayal, about why you need absolute loyalty." For a moment, raw pain flashed across his features, before the mask snapped back into place. "My mother has a talent for oversharing. Adrian, don't." His voice was sharp, final. "Whatever she told you, whatever you think you understand about me or my motivations, forget it. This arrangement is exactly what I said it was, a business transaction. Nothing more." But even as he said the words, his hand found hers under the table, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that contradicted everything he'd just claimed. The auctioneer's voice filled the ballroom, but Sophia barely heard him. All her attention was focused on the man beside her, the billionaire who'd bought her loyalty because he'd learned the hard way that love could be purchased and sold like any other commodity. The terrifying part wasn't that she was falling for a man who didn't believe in love. The terrifying part was that she was beginning to think she could teach him to believe in it again. Chapter 6. The First Crack. The rain started just as they left the Four Seasons, turning Seattle's streets into rivers of reflected neon. Sophia pulled her wrap tighter around her shoulders as they waited for the valet to bring Adrian's car, acutely aware of the tension radiating from the man beside her. He hadn't spoken since the auction ended, hadn't looked at her since she'd mentioned Victoria's name. The silence stretched between them like a minefield neither dared cross. "Adrian," she began. "Don't." His voice was ice. "We're not discussing this." The valet appeared with a sleek black Aston Martin that probably cost more than most people's houses. Adrian tipped the young man with mechanical politeness before opening Sophia's door, a gesture that seemed more habitual than courteous. The leather interior smelled like money and masculine cologne. As they pulled into traffic, the city lights cast shifting patterns across Adrian's sharp profile, highlighting the tension in his jaw. "Where would you like me to drop you?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. The question felt like a dismissal. Like he was already putting distance between them, relegating her back to the role of employee who'd overstepped boundaries. "My apartment is fine," she said quietly. They drove in silence through downtown Seattle, the only sounds the whisper of expensive tires on wet asphalt and the soft jazz playing from hidden speakers. Sophia stared out at the passing streetlights and tried to process everything that had happened tonight. Eleanor's revelations, Victoria's predatory smile, the way Adrian's hand had found hers, under the table even as he'd denied their connection, meant anything. She was so lost in thought that she almost missed the black SUV that had been following them since they left the hotel. "Adrian," she said, turning to look at him. "That car behind us, I know." His hands tightened on the steering wheel. "They've been there for 10 minutes. Fear spiked through her chest. Who? Probably reporters. The Morrison name draws attention, especially when I show up somewhere with a woman who's not Victoria. His smile was sharp and humorless. Congratulations, Sophia. You've just become a person of interest to the Seattle gossip machine. As if summoned by his words, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, then another, and another. Who is Adrian Morrison's mystery woman? Sophia Chen from law school scandal to Billionaire's arm? Morrison's new conquest? What we know about the fallen attorney? Oh God, she whispered, scrolling through message after message. How did they get my number? Money buys information. Information buys access. Adrian took a sharp right turn, and the SUV stayed with them. Welcome to my world, Sophia. Population, everyone who wants something from you. They pulled into the parking garage beneath her building, but the SUV waited at the entrance like a patient predator. Adrian killed the engine and turned to face her, his gray eyes unreadable in the dim lighting. This is what I meant about image mattering, he said quietly. Everything you do now reflects on me. Every choice you make, every person you talk to, every breath you take will be scrutinized and judged. The weight of it settled on her chest like lead. I didn't ask for this. No, he agreed. But you signed the contracts anyway. They sat in silence, the implications of their arrangement suddenly crystal clear. She'd thought she understood what she was agreeing to, but the reality was so much more suffocating than she'd imagined. I should go, she said finally. But when she reached for the door handle, his hand covered hers. Wait, the single word stopped her cold. His touch was warm, electric, at odds with the ice in his voice just moments before. The things my mother told you tonight, he said, not looking at her. About Victoria, about the past. None of that changes what this is. And what is this, Adrian? The question came out more desperate than she'd intended, because I'm getting very mixed signals here. His laugh was bitter. Mixed signals. That's one way to put it. He released her hand and got out of the car, moving around to open her door with that same mechanical courtesy. But when she stepped out, he didn't immediately step back. Instead, he stood close enough that she could smell his cologne, could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes. The truth is, he said softly, I don't know what this is anymore. The admission hung in the air between them. Raw and honest and dangerous. Adrian. A flash of light cut through the garage's shadows, followed by another. The reporters had found them. Shit. Adrian grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the elevator. Move. They ran through the concrete maze of the parking garage, her heels clicking frantically against the floor as camera flashes erupted around them. Questions were shouted from the darkness. Her name, his name, demands for statements about their relationship. The elevator doors closed just as the first reporter rounded the corner, and suddenly they were alone in the small space, breathing hard and pressed together by necessity. Are you all right? Adrian's hands framed her face, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones as he searched her expression for signs of distress. I think so, she whispered, though her heart was racing for more than just the chase. His touch was gentle, protective, nothing like the cold control he usually maintained. This is my fault, he said, his voice rough with something that might have been guilt. I should have anticipated this. Should have protected you better. You couldn't have known. I should have known. His hands tightened slightly against her face. Victoria used to get death threats because of me. Photographers camped outside her apartment. Her family received anonymous packages with photos of her coming and going. His eyes were dark with memory. I won't let that happen to you. The elevator stopped at her floor, but neither of them moved. Why? She asked softly. If this is just business, why do you care what happens to me? For a moment, his mask slipped completely. She saw raw emotion in his eyes, fear, protectiveness, something deeper that made her breath catch. Because, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, it stopped being just business the moment I saw you in that courtroom, holding your head high even though your world was falling apart. The confession hit her like lightning. You were there? At my hearing? I was there. His thumbs traced slow circles on her cheeks. I watched you refuse to break, refuse to beg, refuse to compromise your dignity, even when you had nothing left to lose. And I thought... He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. I thought I'd found someone who understood what it meant to survive. Adrian. His name came out like a prayer. The elevator doors started to close, and he reached out to stop them, the spell between them breaking. Go inside, he said, his voice returning to that familiar controlled tone. Lock your doors. Don't answer the phone unless you recognize the number. What about you? His smile was sharp and dangerous. I'm going to have a conversation with our friends downstairs. Make sure they understand the consequences of harassment. She stepped out of the elevator, but turned back before the doors could close. Adrian? What you said about it not being just business? Forget I said that, he said quickly. It was a mistake. The adrenaline, the situation, it doesn't change anything. But even as he spoke the denial, his eyes told a different story. The doors closed, leaving Sophia alone in the hallway with her racing heart and the lingering scent of his cologne. She let herself into her apartment and immediately went to the window, looking down at the street below. Adrian's Aston Martin was still in the parking garage, but she could see him talking to the group of reporters and photographers. Even from 6 floors up, his body language radiated controlled menace. Her phone buzzed with another text, but this one was from Adrian. Stay away from the windows. This will be handled by morning. She was still staring at the message when her phone rang. Adrian's number. Sophia. His voice was tight with urgency. Pack a bag now. What? Why? Because they have photos of us in the elevator. Close-up, intimate shots that make it look like we were about to kiss. His voice was grim. This is about to become a media circus, and your apartment isn't safe. Fear spiked through her chest. Where am I supposed to go? My place. It's secure, private. They can't get to you there. The idea of staying at Adrian's house, in his space, surrounded by his things, sent panic and something dangerously close to anticipation racing through her system. I don't think that's a good idea, she said weakly. Neither do I, he admitted. But it's the only option we have. 20 minutes later, she was sitting in the passenger seat of his car, with an overnight bag at her feet, and her entire world turned upside down. Again. This arrangement was supposed to be simple, she said as they drove through the rain-soaked streets toward his house. Adrian's laugh was bitter. Nothing about you is simple, Sophia Chen. That's the problem. As they pulled through the gates of his waterfront estate, one thought crystallized in her mind. She'd just crossed another line in their dangerous game. The terrifying part wasn't that there was no going back. The terrifying part was that she didn't want to. Chapter 7. The hidden clause, Adrian's house wasn't a house. It was a monument to wealth and isolation. Glass and steel perched on the edge of Elliott Bay like a crystalline fortress. All clean lines and impossible angles that seemed to defy gravity. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of dark water and distant city lights, while the interior spaces flowed together in an open concept that managed to feel both massive and intimate. Guest wing is upstairs. Second door on the right, Adrian said, setting her bag down in the marble foyer. His voice was carefully neutral, professional. The man who'd touched her face in the elevator and confessed to watching her court hearing had disappeared behind his familiar mask of control. Sophia followed him through the living space, trying not to gawk at the museum-quality art on the walls or the furniture that probably cost more than her yearly salary. Everything was perfect, pristine, cold, like a showroom rather than a home. Are you hungry? He asked, moving toward what she assumed was the kitchen. I can have something prepared, Adrian. His name stopped him mid-stride. We need to talk about what happened tonight. His shoulders tensed. What about it? You said it stopped being just business. What did you mean? I meant I was caught up in the moment. He turned to face her, his gray eyes carefully blank. Adrenaline makes people say things they don't mean. But even as he spoke, his gaze dropped to her lips for just an instant, long enough for her to catch the slip. Right, she said quietly. Of course. He showed her to the guest room, which was larger than her entire apartment, and decorated in shades of cream and gold that made her feel like she was staying in a 5-star hotel. The adjoining bathroom had a soaking tub that could fit 3 people and a shower with more jets than she could count. "There are clothes in the closet," Adrian said from the doorway, not quite meeting her eyes. "Various sizes. They should fit. Whose clothes?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. His jaw tightened. "Previous assistants. I keep a selection available for situations like this. Previous assistants." The words hit her like ice water. How many women had stood in this exact spot, fled to his house for protection, worn clothes he'd purchased for them? "How many?" she asked. "How many what?" "Previous assistants. How many women have there been?" Something dangerous flickered in his expression. "Does it matter?" "It matters to me." For a long moment, they stared at each other across the luxurious guest room. Then his mouth curved into that sharp, humorless smile she was beginning to hate. 3, he said finally, "in the past 5 years. All young, all beautiful, all absolutely loyal." His voice turned cutting. "All temporary." The words stung more than they should have. She was just another in a line of women he'd collected and discarded. Another beautiful accessory for his world of power and privilege. "I see," she managed. "Do you?" He stepped into the room, his presence suddenly overwhelming in the carefully neutral space. "Do you see that this is what I do, Sophia? I find women who need what I can provide. Money, security, protection, and I give it to them in exchange for complete compliance. And when you're done with them?" His smile was razor sharp. Generous severance packages, glowing references, enough money to start fresh somewhere else. He moved closer, and she could smell his cologne, could see the flecks of silver in those cold gray eyes. "Everyone wins!" Everyone except the women who might have thought it meant something more. "That's their mistake, not mine. I'm always very clear about the terms." She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze directly. "And the terms are what exactly?" "Play dress up for your business associates, smile prettily at galas, and warm your bed when you're feeling lonely." The question hung in the air like a challenge. For a moment, raw emotion flashed across his features. Surprise, anger, something that might have been hurt. "I've never required that," he said quietly. "From any of them, no." She took a step closer, drawn by some reckless impulse she didn't understand. "Then what do you require, Adrian?" "Loyalty," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Absolute, unwavering loyalty. The kind that doesn't break when someone offers you more money or a better deal." The pain in his voice was so raw it stole her breath. This wasn't about business arrangements or power games. This was about Victoria's betrayal. About a man who'd learned to buy devotion because he couldn't trust it freely given. "And if I gave you that loyalty?" she asked softly. "What would happen when you were done with me?" His eyes darkened. "You'd move on. Start fresh. Forget this ever happened." "Would I? Or would I end up like them? Discarded when I became inconvenient?" "Sophia, tell me about them," she interrupted. "The other assistants. What were their names?" His jaw clenched. "That's not relevant. It's relevant to me. I want to know what happens to women who cross lines with Adrian Morrison." For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then his shoulders sagged slightly, and she glimpsed the exhaustion beneath his controlled facade. "Rebecca was first," he said finally. 25, fresh out of business school. She lasted 8 months before she decided she was in love with me. His laugh was bitter. "I gave her $50,000 and a recommendation letter. Last I heard, she was married to a tech executive in Portland." Sophia's chest tightened. "And the others?" "Caroline. Brilliant, ambitious, gorgeous. Made it 14 months before she started talking about our relationship to the press." His gray eyes found hers. "She got $75,000 in a non-disclosure agreement." "And the third?" His expression shuddered completely. "Elena, she lasted 2 years. Smart enough to understand the rules, professional enough to follow them." He paused, and something vulnerable flickered across his features. "Until she wasn't. What happened?" "She fell in love with someone else. A reporter who promised her double what I was paying for inside information about my business dealings." His voice went cold, deadly. "She chose him. And the money?" The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Another betrayal. Another woman who'd sold his trust for the right price. "So you see," Adrian continued, his mask sliding back into place. "This arrangement has a built-in expiration date. The only question is whether you'll leave with dignity, or I'll have to force you out." The casual cruelty of it should have made her angry. Instead, it broke her heart. "Is that what you think?" she asked quietly. "That I'm here for your money? That I'll betray you the first chance I get?" "I think you're human," he said simply. "And humans are predictably selfish when the right incentive is offered." She stared at him, seeing past the cold words to the wounded man beneath. He wasn't protecting his business. He was protecting his heart. Building walls so high that no one could climb them, creating contracts so comprehensive that betrayal became legally impossible rather than emotionally devastating. "You're wrong," she said finally. "Am I?" "Yes." She moved closer, close enough to see the surprise that flickered across his expression. "You're wrong about me, and you're wrong about what I want. And what do you want, Sophia?" The question was barely a whisper, loaded with possibilities that could destroy them both. "I want to prove to you that not everyone has a price," she said, her voice steady despite the way her heart was racing, "that some things can't be bought or sold or negotiated in a contract." His eyes searched her face, looking for the lie he was certain had to be there. "And what would you get in return for this?" "Proof," she smiled, sad and knowing, the chance to watch Adrian Morrison learn to trust someone again. For a moment, the mask slipped completely. She saw raw longing in his expression, hope warring with cynicism, the desperate want of a man who'd forgotten what it felt like to believe in another person. Then his phone buzzed, shattering the moment like glass. He glanced at it, and his expression hardened. "The photos are already online. TMZ, page 6, every gossip blog in the country." He looked up at her, his gray eyes unreadable. "As of tonight, you're officially Adrian Morrison's mystery woman. There's no going back from that." "I know," she said quietly. "Do you?" He pocketed the phone, his attention focused entirely on her. "Because tomorrow, everyone will want to know who you are, what you mean to me, whether you're sleeping in my bed or just my guest room." Heat flooded her cheeks. "And what will you tell them?" His smile was dangerous and knowing. "That depends, Sophia. Which room would you prefer to be sleeping in?" The question hung between them like a dare, loaded with implications that could change everything. She should say the guest room, should maintain professional boundaries and protect what remained of her dignity. Instead, she heard herself say, "That's not really the question, is it?" "No," his eyebrows rose. "Then what is?" "The question is whether you're brave enough to find out what happens when someone chooses to stay, not because they're paid to, but because they want to." The challenge hit its mark. She saw his mask crack, saw the vulnerable man beneath the billionaire facade. "You don't know what you're asking," he said roughly. "Don't I?" She took another step closer, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. "I'm asking you to take the biggest risk of your life, Adrian Morrison. I'm asking you to trust me." For a heartbeat, she thought he might reach for her, might close the distance between them and find out what it felt like to want someone who wasn't for sale. Instead, he stepped back, the walls slamming back into place. "Get some rest," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Tomorrow is going to be complicated." As he walked away, leaving her alone in the pristine guest room with its closet full of clothes from other women, one thought echoed in her mind. She'd just declared war on Adrian Morrison's carefully constructed defenses. The terrifying part wasn't that she might lose. The terrifying part was that she was starting to think she might actually win. Chapter 8. Betrayal. Sophia woke to the sound of her phone buzzing incessantly against the nightstand. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Adrian's guest room, Seattle's skyline was painted in shades of dawn, but her phone screen showed 17 missed calls and 43 unread messages. The first voicemail was from her mother, speaking in rapid Mandarin, her voice tight with worry. The second was from a reporter offering money for an exclusive interview. The third made her blood run cold. "Miss Chen, this is Detective Sarah Martinez with Seattle PD. We need to speak with you regarding some allegations that have been made. Please call me back immediately." "Allegations?" Her hands trembled as she scrolled through the text messages, each one worse than the last. "Breaking. Morrison's mystery woman, linked to multi-million-dollar embezzlement, fallen attorney. Now Billionaire's latest conquest. Coincidence or con? Exclusive. Inside source claims Sophia Chen still under federal investigation. The messages blurred together as panic seized her chest. Someone had leaked information about the Morrison and Associates scandal. Details that hadn't been public. Specifics about the investigation that only someone with inside access could know. Her phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Her voice came out as barely a whisper. Miss Chen? This is James Crawford from the Seattle Tribune. I'd like to ask you some questions about your relationship with Adrian Morrison and your involvement in the Morrison and Associates embezzlement scandal. I was cleared of all charges. Were you? Because my sources tell me the FBI investigation was closed due to lack of evidence, not because you were innocent. And now you've conveniently landed in the bed of one of Seattle's wealthiest men. The reporter's voice was sharp, predatory. Care to comment on how that looks? She hung up, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The phone immediately rang again. Different number, same vultures. Sophia. Adrian's voice came from the doorway, and she spun around to find him standing there in a charcoal suit, looking perfectly composed despite the early hour. What's wrong? She held up her phone, which was ringing again. Someone leaked information about the embezzlement case. Reporters are calling. The police want to speak with me, and according to Twitter, I'm either a gold digger or a criminal mastermind. His expression went deadly cold. Show me. She handed him her phone, watching as he scrolled through the messages with surgical precision. His jaw tightened with each new headline. This is coordinated, he said finally. Someone with access to sealed records orchestrated this leak. His gray eyes found hers. Who knew about your relationship with me besides my mother and Victoria? I don't know. No one, I thought. Fear clawed at her chest. Adrian, if this reopens the investigation, it won't. His voice was absolute, commanding. I have lawyers who eat federal prosecutors for breakfast. But even as he said it, her phone rang again. This time, the caller ID made her blood freeze. Richard Morrison. Adrian saw the name and his entire body went rigid. Don't answer it. Who is Richard Morrison? My father. The words came out like broken glass. And if he's calling you directly, we have a much bigger problem than reporters. Before she could respond, the phone stopped ringing and immediately chimed with a voicemail. Adrian gestured for her to play it on speaker. Miss Chen. The voice was cultured, authoritative, with the same commanding presence as Adrian but without any warmth. This is Richard Morrison. I believe we need to have a conversation about your association with my son. I'll be at the Morrison Industries building at 9 a.m. I suggest you join me. Alone. The message ended, leaving them in suffocating silence. Absolutely not, Adrian said immediately. You're not meeting with him. Why? What aren't you telling me? His laugh was bitter. My father doesn't make social calls, Sophia. If he wants to meet with you, it means he sees you as either an asset to be acquired or a threat to be eliminated. Eliminated? The word came out as a squeak. Financially, socially, professionally. Adrian moved to the window, staring out at the water with rigid shoulders. Richard Morrison destroys people who threaten the family legacy. And right now, with these photos and headlines, you're a threat. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Check your email. A friend. With trembling fingers, she opened her email app. The message contained a single attachment, a PDF that made her stomach drop through the floor. Adrian, she whispered, you need to see this. He took the phone and she watched the color drain from his face as he read. What is it? She asked, though part of her already knew it would be devastating. Internal FBI memos about the Morrison and Associates investigation. His voice was deadly quiet. Including sealed testimony that was never made public. How is that possible? Someone with very high-level access leaked confidential federal documents. He looked up at her, and she saw something that might have been fear in his gray eyes. Someone who wants to destroy you, or me, or both. The implications hit her like a freight train. This isn't just about discrediting me, is it? Someone's trying to manipulate you through me. The question is who? Adrian began pacing, his mind clearly racing. Victoria doesn't have this kind of access. My mother wouldn't risk exposing family business. My father... He stopped abruptly. Christ, what? My father has been trying to force me to marry Victoria for years. Merge the Morrison and Pemberton fortunes. Create a dynasty. His smile was sharp as a blade. What better way to eliminate an obstacle than to frame her for being a criminal opportunist? The room felt like it was spinning. You think your own father is behind this? I think my father would burn down half of Seattle if it meant securing the Morrison legacy. Adrian's phone started ringing. And right now you're standing in the way of his perfect plan. He answered the call with a curt, Morrison. Sophia could hear a woman's voice on the other end, speaking rapidly and urgently. Slow down, Janet, Adrian said. What's happening at the office? A pause as he listened, and his expression grew progressively darker. How many reporters? Another pause. And the board meeting was moved to when? His eyes found Sophia's. I see. Yes, I'll be there within the hour. He hung up and turned to her with grim determination. Emergency board meeting called by my father. The Morrison Industries board wants to discuss the potential damage to the company's reputation caused by my association with you. His voice was ice-cold fury. They're going to demand I terminate your employment. Maybe that's for the best, she said quietly. Maybe I should just disappear. Let this blow over. No. The word was absolute, final. I don't abandon people who work for me. Even when keeping me puts your company at risk? He moved closer, his gray eyes intense. Especially then. Her phone rang again. Detective Martinez returning her call, no doubt. But this time, Adrian answered it. Detective, this is Adrian Morrison. Miss Chen is represented by counsel. Any questions should be directed to Morrison Industries legal department. He rattled off a phone number. Have a good day. He hung up and handed her the phone. Pack your things. We're going to the office. Adrian, maybe I shouldn't... You're not running, Sophia. His voice was steel wrapped in silk. Someone orchestrated this attack, which means they see you as important enough to destroy. That makes you valuable. And I protect what's valuable to me. Valuable to me. The words sent warmth flooding through her chest despite the chaos surrounding them. What if they succeed? She asked. What if the board forces you to fire me? His smile was dangerous and knowing. Then they're going to learn exactly why it's a mistake to back Adrian Morrison into a corner. As they left his house and drove toward downtown, Sophia's mind raced with possibilities and fears. Someone with serious power and resources was trying to destroy her, using her as a weapon against Adrian. But as she watched him navigate traffic with cold precision, his jaw set with determination, one thought crystallized in her mind. Adrian Morrison wasn't just protecting an employee anymore. He was protecting something he'd started to care about. The terrifying part wasn't that they were under attack. The terrifying part was that she was beginning to realize she'd become worth fighting for. Chapter 9. Escape. The Morrison Industries boardroom felt like a coliseum designed for corporate executions. Sophia sat in the chair beside Adrian's at the head of the massive mahogany table, acutely aware of the 12 pairs of eyes studying her with varying degrees of hostility, curiosity, and calculation. The board members, titans of industry, political power brokers, old Seattle money, looked like they'd gathered to watch a gladiator fight for her life. At the far end of the table, Richard Morrison commanded attention without saying a word. He was an older, colder version of Adrian, the same sharp features and gray eyes, but without any trace of warmth or humanity. This was a man who'd built an empire by crushing everything in his path. Gentlemen, Richard began, his voice carrying easily through the room. We're here to discuss the recent complications surrounding my son's employment decisions. Adrian's hand found hers under the table, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that was both reassuring and possessive. There are no complications, Adrian said coolly. Miss Chen is a valued employee who's been the victim of a coordinated smear campaign. Valued employee? Margaret Whitmore, the silver-haired CEO of Whitmore Industries, leaned forward with predatory interest. The photos suggest a rather different kind of value. Heat flooded Sophia's cheeks, but she kept her expression neutral. The photos show nothing inappropriate, Adrian replied, his voice dropping to a dangerous level. And I don't recall this board having authority over my personal life. Your personal life becomes our business when it threatens shareholder value, said Thomas Chen. No relation, despite the surname. Morrison Industries' longest-serving board member. The Morrison name represents integrity, stability, trustworthiness. This scandal undermines all of that. What scandal? Sophia found herself speaking before she could stop herself. I was investigated and cleared of all charges. The FBI closed the case. Due to lack of evidence, Richard Morrison interjected smoothly. Not the same thing as innocence. Miss Chen. The words hit like a physical blow. But before she could respond, Adrian's voice cut through the tension like a blade. If anyone in this room questions Miss Chen's integrity again, this meeting is over. His gray eyes swept the table with lethal precision. And I'll be happy to discuss your own backgrounds with the press. I'm sure they'd find Margaret's insider trading settlement fascinating, or Thomas's creative accounting practices in the 90s. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Adrian, Richard's voice carried a warning. Don't make threats you can't follow through on. I never make threats, Father. I make promises. The word father dripped with contempt and barely contained fury. Sophia could feel the years of conflict between them crackling through the air like electricity. The fact remains, Margaret pressed on, though her voice had lost some of its conviction, that Miss Chen's presence creates liability for this company. The media attention alone will blow over in a week, Adrian interrupted. Unless, of course, someone continues to feed the flames. His eyes found his father's across the table, and the accusation was clear as crystal. Are you suggesting I'm responsible for this media circus? Richard's tone was dangerously quiet. I'm suggesting that someone with high-level access leaked sealed FBI documents to destroy Miss Chen's reputation. Adrian leaned back in his chair, the picture of controlled menace, someone who benefits from eliminating her from the equation. And who would that be? Someone who wants to force me into a marriage alliance with Victoria Pemberton. The words exploded through the boardroom like a grenade. Several members exchanged glances while others studied their hands with sudden fascination. Richard's smile was cold as winter. Your paranoia is showing, son. Is it paranoia when the evidence supports the theory? Adrian pulled out his phone and placed it on the table. Janet, please join us. A moment later, his assistant entered carrying a thick folder. She placed it in front of Adrian and left without a word. Internal communications between Pemberton Industries and several members of this board, Adrian announced, opening the folder, discussing the benefits of a Morrison-Pemberton merger, the obstacles to that merger, and the best methods for removing those obstacles. Sophia's blood turned to ice. She was the obstacle. She was the problem they were discussing like a business expense to be eliminated. Those are confidential communications. Thomas started. That detail a coordinated effort to manipulate my personal life for corporate gain. Adrian's voice was deadly calm, including payments to certain members of the press for favorable coverage of Victoria and negative coverage of anyone else in my vicinity. Margaret Whitmore had gone very pale. You can't prove... I can prove everything. Adrian stood slowly, his presence commanding the entire room. The question is whether this board wants to explain to federal investigators why they conspired to interfere with an FBI investigation by leaking sealed documents. The silence that followed was deafening. You're bluffing, Richard said finally. Am I? Adrian's smile was razor-sharp. Would you like to find out? Sophia watched the power struggle unfold with a mixture of awe and terror. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was years of family conflict and corporate politics exploding into open warfare. Enough. Richard Morrison stood as well, matching his son's commanding presence. This board has a responsibility to protect Morrison Industries' reputation and shareholder value. Miss Chen represents a liability that outweighs any potential benefits. Then you have a choice to make, Adrian said quietly. Accept that Miss Chen stays, or find a new CEO. The ultimatum hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall. Adrian, Sophia whispered, horrified. Don't. This company means everything to you. No, he said, his gray eyes never leaving his father's. It doesn't. The words sent shock through the room. Richard Morrison's carefully controlled expression cracked for just an instant, revealing something that might have been pain. You would destroy everything we've built over this woman? Richard's voice was barely controlled fury. I would destroy everything you built to protect someone who matters to me, Adrian corrected. There's a difference. Someone who matters to me. The words sent warmth flooding through Sophia's chest even as panic seized her heart. He was willing to lose his empire for her. This is insane, she said, standing abruptly. All eyes turned to her, but she only had attention for one pair of gray eyes. Adrian, stop. Just stop. She turned to address the board, her voice steady despite the way her hands were shaking. You want me gone? Fine, I resign, effective immediately. She looked at Richard Morrison, meeting his cold gaze directly. You win. Sophia, no. Adrian started. Yes. She pulled off the badge that identified her as a Morrison Industries employee and placed it on the polished table. This was always temporary anyway, right? Just another arrangement with an expiration date. The words hit Adrian like a physical blow. She saw him flinch, saw something vulnerable flash across his expression before the mask snapped back into place. If that's what you want, he said carefully, it's what's best for everyone. She gathered her purse, her hand surprisingly steady. Good luck with your meeting. She walked toward the door, each step feeling like it might be her last. At the doorway, she paused and looked back at Adrian one final time. He was standing frozen at the head of the table, looking like a man who'd just watched everything important walk out of his life. For what it's worth, she said quietly, some things can't be bought or negotiated in a contract. Some things have to be chosen freely, or they don't mean anything at all. Then she was gone, walking through the corridors of Morrison Industries for the last time, her heels clicking against marble that echoed with finality. She made it to the elevator before the tears started. As the doors closed and she descended toward the lobby, one thought echoed in her mind. She'd just walked away from the only man who'd ever been, willing to lose everything for her. The terrifying part wasn't that she'd made the hardest choice of her life. The terrifying part was that she wasn't sure it was the right one. Chapter 10. The Real Enemy. 3 days since Sophia had walked out of Morrison Industries, and Adrian felt like he was losing his mind. He stood in his office, staring out at Elliott Bay without seeing the water, a tumbler of whiskey untouched in his hand. The company moved around him. Meetings, decisions, the relentless machinery of business. But it all felt hollow. Meaningless. Sir? Janet's voice cut through his brooding. Victoria Pemberton is here to see you. Of course she was. Like a vulture circling fresh carrion. Send her in. Victoria entered his office like she owned it, all flowing silk and calculated grace. Her smile was triumphant, predatory, the look of a woman who'd gotten exactly what she wanted. Adrian, darling, you look terrible. She settled, into the chair across from his desk like she belonged there. Rough few days? What do you want, Victoria? To offer my condolences, of course. I heard about your little assistant running away. Her voice dripped false sympathy. It must be so disappointing when people show their true colors. Adrian turned from the window, his gray eyes cold as winter. And what color would that be? Yellow, obviously. The poor thing couldn't handle the pressure of your world. Victoria examined her manicured nails with theatrical concern. Though I suppose we should have expected it. People from her background rarely have the strength for real adversity. The casual racism made his jaw clench. Careful, Victoria. Your true colors are showing. Her laugh was like breaking glass. Oh, Adrian, always so protective of your strays. She leaned forward, her expression growing serious. But that's over now. You've learned your lesson about picking up damaged goods. Have I? Haven't you? She stood, moving around his desk with predatory confidence. Face the truth, darling. She was never going to stay. Women like that, desperate, hungry, they take what they can get and disappear when things get difficult. Women like what, exactly? Victoria's smile was sharp as a blade. Women who aren't worthy of the Morrison name. The words hung in the air like poison. Adrian studied Victoria's perfect face, seeing clearly for perhaps the first time the calculating coldness beneath the beauty. "Is that what you think?" he asked quietly. "That Sophia wasn't worthy?" "I think she was exactly what she appeared to be, a gold digger who got in over her head." Victoria moved closer, close enough that her perfume invaded his space. "But it's over now. You can stop pretending this was anything more than a business arrangement." Pretending. Adrian's voice was dangerously soft. Interesting choice of words. Something flickered in Victoria's expression. Uncertainty, maybe, or the first hint of concern. "I just mean, you mean that you orchestrated this entire situation?" Adrian set down his whiskey and turned his full attention to her. "Didn't you, Victoria?" Her laugh was forced, brittle. "I have no idea what you're talking about. Don't you?" He moved to his desk, pulling out a file folder. "Because I've spent the last 3 days investigating exactly how those FBI documents were leaked." Victoria's face went pale, but her smile never wavered. And it's fascinating what money can buy. Access to sealed records, for instance, or reporters willing to publish unverified information. Adrian opened the folder, revealing photographs and bank records. "Tell me, Victoria, what does $50,000 buy from a corrupt federal clerk these days?" The color drained completely from her face. "You can't prove. I can prove everything." Adrian's voice was deadly calm. "The payments to Bradley Hutchins at the FBI Records Division, the bribes to 3 different reporters, the coordination with my father's board members." He looked up at her, his gray eyes like winter storms. "I can prove that you orchestrated the entire destruction of an innocent woman's reputation to manipulate me into coming back to you." Victoria's carefully constructed facade cracked like glass. "She's not innocent," she spat, all pretense of sympathy gone. "She's exactly what I said, a desperate climber who would have sold you out the first chance she got." "No," Adrian said quietly. "That's what you are." The words hit like a physical blow. Victoria recoiled as if he'd slapped her. "How dare you? How dare I what? Tell the truth?" Adrian stood, his presence suddenly overwhelming in the space between them. "You destroyed an innocent woman, Victoria. You leaked federal documents, bribed government officials, and orchestrated a character assassination, all to force me into a relationship I don't want." "You did want it once," she said desperately. "We were perfect together, Adrian. We could have had everything." "We had everything," he corrected. "And you threw it away when you chose money over loyalty. When you sold my business secrets to Hamilton Industries for a better marriage prospect." Victoria's eyes widened. "You knew?" "I've always known." His smile was sharp as a blade. "The question is why I ever thought you deserved a second chance." For a moment she looked genuinely stricken. Then her expression hardened into something ugly and vindictive. "You think she's any different? You think your precious little assistant won't betray you the moment someone offers her a better deal?" Victoria's voice turned vicious. "She already did, Adrian. She walked away the second things got difficult." "She walked away to protect me," he said quietly. "To save my company and my relationship with the board. She sacrificed everything she'd gained to keep me from having to choose between her and my empire. And you're pathetic enough to believe that?" "I'm smart enough to recognize the difference between love and manipulation." Adrian moved to his office door, opening it with deliberate finality. "Get out, Victoria. And if you ever come near Sophia or me again, I'll have you arrested for federal conspiracy charges." Victoria's face twisted with rage and desperation. "You're making a mistake, Adrian. She's gone. She's not coming back. And when you finally realize what you've lost, what I've lost, Adrian's laugh was cold. Victoria, I lost you 5 years ago. I just finally figured out it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Security appeared in his doorway. He must have pressed the silent alarm. 2 large men in dark suits flanked Victoria like an honor guard. Ms. Pemberton needs an escort to the lobby, Adrian said pleasantly. Please ensure she understands she's no longer welcome in this building. As they led her away, Victoria's veneer of sophistication cracked completely. You'll regret this, Adrian. She's nothing. Nothing. Her voice echoed down the hallway until the elevator doors cut off her protestations. Adrian closed his office door and leaned against it, suddenly exhausted. The victory felt hollow. Empty. He had his answers. He had his revenge. He had proof that Sophia was exactly who he'd thought she was. Loyal, selfless, worthy of protection. But he didn't have her. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Check the Seattle Tribune online. Now. A friend. With growing dread, Adrian pulled up the newspaper's website on his laptop. The headline made his blood run cold. Exclusive. The real story behind Morrison Industries scandal. Federal investigation reveals conspiracy. The article was detailed, devastating, and completely accurate. It laid out Victoria's entire scheme. The bribes, the leaked documents, the coordinated media campaign. It named names, provided evidence, and painted a picture of corporate manipulation that would end careers and possibly result in federal charges. But most importantly, it completely exonerated Sophia Chen. Adrian scrolled to the byline and felt his world shift on its axis. By Sophia Chen, former attorney and investigative reporter, she'd done it. Somehow, in 3 days, she'd gathered evidence, confirmed sources, and written the article that would destroy her enemies and clear her name. She'd saved herself. His phone rang. Janet's voice was tight with urgency. Sir, the FBI is here. They want to speak with you about the Victoria Pemberton investigation. Send them in, Adrian said, his eyes still fixed on Sophia's byline. As federal. Agents filed into his office. One thought crystallized in his mind with perfect clarity. He'd been wrong about everything. The real enemy hadn't been his father, or the board, or even Victoria's manipulation. The real enemy had been his own fear. His inability to trust that someone could choose to stay without being paid to, choose to fight without being commanded to, choose to love without contracts or guarantees. Sophia had proven that love couldn't be bought or sold or negotiated. The terrifying part wasn't that he'd lost her. The terrifying part was that he still had time to win her back. For a heartbeat, they simply stared at each other. 2 damaged people standing on the edge of something that could save them both, or destroy them completely. Then Adrian reached for her, his hands framing her face with infinite gentleness. I love you, he said again, like a prayer, and I choose you. Not because I have to, not because of contracts or arrangements, but because I can't imagine a world without you in it. Then don't, she whispered, rising on her toes to close the distance between them. Don't imagine it, just choose me, every day, the way I'm choosing you. When their lips met, it wasn't desperate or hungry or driven by adrenaline. It was soft, tender, full of promise and possibility, and the terrifying beauty of 2 people brave enough to love without guarantees. As they broke apart, foreheads touching in the glow of the city lights, one thought crystallized in both their minds. Love wasn't a contract to be negotiated or a transaction to be completed. Love was a choice to be made, again and again, by 2 people brave enough to stand together against whatever came next. Chapter 11. Sacrifice in Stan Sophia's apartment felt smaller than ever, cluttered with the remnants of her brief life as Adrian Morrison's assistant. Designer clothes still hung in her closet, clothes she couldn't return and couldn't bear to look at. The signing bonus check sat in her account, untouched, like evidence of a dream that had turned into a nightmare. She was sitting at her kitchen table, laptop open to a dozen new interview requests following her Tribune article, when someone knocked on her door. Her heart stuttered hopefully before logic reasserted itself. Adrian Morrison didn't knock on apartment doors in buildings without doormen. Through the peephole, she saw a woman she didn't recognize, middle-aged, professionally dressed with kind eyes and an uncertain smile. "Miss Chen, my name is Rebecca Martinez. I believe we need to talk." Sophia opened the door cautiously. "About what?" "About Adrian Morrison, and about the fact that you're not the first woman to walk away from him." Rebecca, the first assistant, the one who'd lasted 8 months before she decided she was in love with him. "Please," Rebecca continued, "I know this is strange, but I think you need to hear what I have to say." Against her better judgment, Sophia let her in. Rebecca settled on the worn couch with the careful grace of someone accustomed to expensive things, but comfortable in modest spaces. "I read your article," Rebecca said without preamble. "Brilliant work. Victoria Pemberton won't recover from that kind of exposure." "Thank you." Sophia remained standing, arms crossed defensively. "But I don't understand why you're here." "Because I made the same mistake you did. I walked away from Adrian Morrison thinking I was protecting him." Rebecca's smile was sad and knowing, and I've regretted it every day since. The words hit Sophia like a physical blow. "What do you mean?" "I mean, Adrian Morrison doesn't hire assistants, Sophia. He collects broken people and tries to fix them because he can't fix himself." Rebecca leaned forward, her expression intense. "Elena, Caroline, and we weren't employees. We were therapy, his way of proving he could save someone, even if he couldn't save himself from his own demons." Sophia sank into the chair across from her. That's horrible, is it? Because from where I sit, it looks like love. Complicated, damaged, self-destructive love, but love nonetheless." Rebecca's voice grew gentle. "Do you know why I really left?" Sophia shook her head. "Because I realized he was falling in love with me, and I was terrified of not being enough for someone that powerful. So I told him I loved him, forced him to reject me, and used his rejection as an excuse to leave." Rebecca's laugh was bitter, self-sabotage disguised as noble sacrifice. "But he gave you $70,000. 50,000. And I didn't want it." Rebecca pulled out her phone, showing Sophia a bank statement. "I donated every penny to domestic violence shelters in his name. He still gets thank you letters." The revelation sent Sophia's world tilting sideways. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Elena came to see me yesterday, and Caroline called this morning. We've all been watching the news, reading about you and Adrian, and we realized something." Rebecca's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "He never fought for any of us, never risked anything real to keep us, but he was willing to destroy his empire for you." Sophia's chest tightened painfully. "He was protecting his company. He was protecting you." Rebecca stood, moving to the window that overlooked the street. "Do you know what he's done since you left?" "I assume he's moved on. Found another assistant." The words tasted like ashes. "He fired the entire board of directors." Sophia's breath caught. "What?" "Emergency shareholder meeting yesterday. Used his majority stake to remove everyone who conspired against you, his own father included." Rebecca turned back to her, expression serious. "He's restructuring the entire company, liquidating assets to pay legal settlements, risking everything to make sure Victoria Pemberton faces the full consequences of what she did to you. That's business. Corporate damage control. Is that what you call it when a man gives up half his fortune to ensure justice for someone who walked away from him?" Rebecca's voice was gentle but relentless. "Because that's what he's doing, Sophia. He's sacrificing his empire to clear your name completely. No shadows, no whispers, no doubts about your innocence." Sophia felt like she couldn't breathe. "I don't understand. Don't you?" Rebecca smiled sadly. "He's proving that some things matter more than money, more than power, more than the Morrison legacy itself." Before Sophia could respond, her phone buzzed with a news alert. Breaking. Morrison Industries, CEO donates $500 million to criminal justice reform, following corporate conspiracy scandal, with trembling fingers. She opened the article. The photo showed Adrian at a press conference, looking haggard but determined as he announced the largest corporate donation in Seattle's history. Money earmarked for legal aid societies, wrongful conviction organizations, and federal oversight of white-collar crime investigations. He's making sure this never happens to anyone else, Rebecca said quietly, creating systems to protect people like you from people like Victoria. Sophia stared at the photo, seeing past Adrian's controlled expression to the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight he was carrying. He wasn't just clearing her name, he was trying to fix a broken system because it had been used to hurt her. There's more, Rebecca continued. Elena said he's been calling law schools, creating scholarship programs for students from disadvantaged backgrounds. Caroline heard he's funding a legal clinic for people who can't afford representation in federal cases. Each revelation felt like another crack in Sophia's carefully constructed defenses. This wasn't corporate strategy or damage control. This was a man trying to build a better world because the current one had failed someone he cared about. "Why are you really here?" Sophia asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Because Adrian Morrison saved my life," Rebecca said simply. "Not with money or connections, but by showing me I was worth protecting when I didn't believe it myself. And I walked away before I could save his." She moved to the door, then paused with her hand on the knob. "He's at the waterfront tonight, Pier 70, where he goes when he needs to think. If you're brave enough to let someone love you without conditions, contracts, or guarantees." Rebecca's smile was sad and hopeful. "If you're brave enough to believe that some things are worth fighting for." After Rebecca left, Sophia sat in her empty apartment surrounded by the ghost of her life with Adrian. The designer clothes that had made her feel like someone else, the contracts that had tried to define love in legal terms, the memories of gray eyes that saw through her defenses to the woman beneath. Her phone rang. "Her mother's number, Sophia?" Her mother's voice was thick with worry. "I saw the news article. About the FBI. About that woman who tried to hurt you. Are you all right?" "I don't know, Mom. The admission came out broken, raw. I think I made a terrible mistake." "Love often feels like a mistake at first," her mother said gently. "The question is whether you're brave enough to fix it." As evening fell over Seattle, Sophia found herself walking toward the waterfront without consciously deciding to go. Her feet carried her through the city streets, past the glittering towers where she'd once worked, toward the water where a man might be standing alone, trying to figure out how to rebuild his life. Pier 70 stretched into Elliott Bay like a finger pointing toward possibilities. And there, silhouetted against the city lights, stood Adrian Morrison. He looked smaller somehow, more human. The expensive suit couldn't hide the vulnerability in his shoulders, the loneliness in his posture. "You came," he said without turning around. "Rebecca said you'd be here." Sophia moved to stand beside him, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body, far enough to maintain the illusion of safety. "She told me what you've been doing. The donations, the scholarships, the legal reforms. Someone had to." His voice was rough with exhaustion. "The system failed you, Sophia. I failed you. The least I could do was try to make sure it doesn't happen again." "You didn't fail me." He turned then, and she saw the raw pain in his gray eyes. "Didn't I? I let my father manipulate the board. Let Victoria destroy your reputation. Let my own fears keep me from fighting hard enough to protect you. You were willing to give up your company for me. And you walked away to protect me from having to." His smile was heartbreaking. "We're quite a pair, aren't we? Both so afraid of being hurt that we hurt each other instead." They stood in silence, watching the lights of the city reflect on the dark water. The space between them felt like an ocean, close enough to touch, too far to bridge. "I love you," Adrian said finally, his voice barely audible above the sound of water lapping against the pier. "Not as an employee or an arrangement or a business transaction. I love you, Sophia Chen, and I don't know how to do that without destroying everything in my path." The words hung in the salt air between them, raw and honest and terrifying. "Then learn," she said quietly. He turned to face her fully, hope and fear warring in his expression. "How?" "The same way I'm learning to let someone love me without earning it." She took a step closer, close enough to see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes. "Together, without contracts or conditions or escape clauses. What if I hurt you again? What if you don't? For a heartbeat, They simply stared at each other. Two damaged people standing on the edge of something that could save them both, or destroy them completely. Then Adrian reached for her, his hands framing her face with infinite gentleness. "I love you," he said again, like a prayer, "and I choose you. Not because I have to, not because of contracts or arrangements, but because I can't imagine a world without you in it." "Then don't," she whispered, rising on her toes to close the distance between them. "Don't imagine it, just choose me, every day, the way I'm choosing you." When their lips met, it wasn't desperate or hungry or driven by adrenaline. It was soft, tender, full of promise and possibility, and the terrifying beauty of two people brave enough to love without guarantees. As they broke apart, foreheads touching in the glow of the city lights, one thought crystallized in both their minds. Love wasn't a contract to be negotiated or a transaction to be completed. Love was a choice to be made, again and again, by two people brave enough to stand together against whatever came next. Chapter 12. Final Showdown. The federal courthouse buzzed with media attention as Adrian and Sophia walked up the marble steps together, her hand firmly in his. 6 weeks had passed since their reunion on the pier. 6 weeks of rebuilding trust, learning to love without fear, and watching the legal system slowly grind toward justice. Today was the day Victoria Pemberton would face the consequences of her actions. "Are you ready for this?" Adrian asked, his thumb stroking across her knuckles as they approached the courthouse doors. "I've been ready since the moment she tried to destroy my life," Sophia replied, her voice steady despite the cameras flashing around them. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Richard Morrison sat in the front row, looking every one of his 70 years for the first time since Sophia had known him. The board members who'd conspired with Victoria had already taken plea deals, their careers and reputations in ruins. But Victoria had refused to negotiate, convinced that her money and connections would save her. She was about to learn otherwise. All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Williams. As the judge took her seat, Sophia felt Adrian's hand tighten around hers. They'd been through hell to get to this moment. Betrayal, manipulation, the systematic destruction of her reputation. But they'd survived it together, and now they would see justice served together. "The United States of America versus Victoria Elizabeth Pemberton," the clerk announced. "Case number 2025 CR 00847. Victoria sat at the defendant's table in a designer suit that probably cost more than most people's cars, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her expression radiating the kind of entitled confidence that came from a lifetime of having money solve her problems. She looked like she was attending a charity luncheon rather than a federal criminal. Trial, her lawyer, one of Seattle's most expensive defense, attorneys, stood with the kind of swagger that suggested he thought this was a formality. "Your Honor, my client pleads not guilty to all charges." Judge Williams nodded curtly. "The prosecution may present their opening statement." Assistant U.S. Attorney Maria Santos rose with the careful precision of someone who'd built her career on taking down white-collar criminals. "Your Honor, this case is about abuse of power, corruption of federal systems, and the lengths to which wealth and privilege will go to manipulate innocent lives." Her voice carried clearly through the packed courtroom. The defendant, Victoria Pemberton, orchestrated a conspiracy that reached into federal agencies, corrupted government employees, and destroyed an innocent woman's reputation, all to force a man into a relationship he didn't want. Victoria's composure cracked slightly at the blunt assessment. "Over the next several days, we will present evidence that Ms. Pemberton bribed federal employees, leaked classified documents, coordinated media campaigns to destroy Ms. Sophia Chen's reputation, and conspired with corporate executives to manipulate stock prices and board decisions." Santos turned to gesture toward Sophia and Adrian. She turned love into a weapon and nearly destroyed two people who had committed no crime other than falling for each other. The defense attorney's opening was predictable. Claims of overreach, suggestions that Victoria was being prosecuted for jealousy rather than crimes, attempts to paint her as a victim of prosecutorial overreach. But the evidence was overwhelming. For 3 days, witness after witness took the stand. FBI records clerk Bradley Hutchins, who'd taken $50,000 to leak sealed documents, reporters who'd been paid to publish unverified stories, board members who'd coordinated with Victoria to manipulate corporate decisions. The most devastating testimony came from Victoria's own assistant, a young woman named Jennifer, who'd kept meticulous records of her boss's activities. Ms. Pemberton told me to coordinate with Mr. Richard Morrison's office to ensure maximum media coverage of the leaked documents, Jennifer testified, her voice shaking slightly. She said, and I quote, "That little bitch won't know what hit her. By the time we're done, she'll be lucky to get a job cleaning toilets." Sophia felt Adrian's hand clench around hers at the casual cruelty of the statement. On the fourth day, Sophia herself took the stand. "Miss Chen," Prosecutor Santos began gently, "can you describe what it felt like to wake up to 17 missed calls and discover that your reputation was being systematically destroyed?" "Terrifying," Sophia answered honestly. "I'd already lost my career once due to circumstances beyond my control. To have someone deliberately destroy what little I'd managed to rebuild, it felt like drowning. And when you learned that Ms. Pemberton was behind the attacks, I was angry, but mostly I was sad." Sophia's eyes found Victoria across the courtroom, sad that someone would go to such lengths to hurt innocent people just to get what they wanted. The defense attorney's cross-examination was brutal, attempting to paint Sophia as a gold digger who'd manipulated Adrian for money. But 6 weeks of therapy and Adrian's unwavering support had given her the strength to face the attacks with dignity. "Mr. Morrison is a billionaire," the defense attorney pressed. "Are you honestly telling this court that his wealth played no role in your relationship?" "His wealth played a role," Sophia admitted calmly. "It made me suspicious of his motives and afraid to trust my own feelings. Money complicates everything, but it doesn't create love, and it can't destroy it if it's real." When Adrian took the stand the next day, his testimony was devastating in its controlled fury. "Ms. Pemberton didn't just attack Sophia," he said, his gray eyes never leaving the jury. "She attacked the idea that someone could be loved for who they are rather than what they can provide. She tried to reduce our relationship to a transaction because she couldn't comprehend that real love exists without conditions." The defense attorney tried to rattle him, suggesting his feelings for Sophia were just guilt over her persecution. "Mr. Morrison, isn't it true that you felt responsible for Miss Chen's troubles and confused that guilt with love?" Adrian's smile was sharp as a blade. "Counselor, I've spent my entire adult life confusing transactions with relationships. I know the difference between guilt and love. Guilt would have led me to write Sophia a check and send her away. Love led me to restructure my entire company to ensure justice was served." On the final day, Victoria's lawyer put her on the stand in a last-ditch attempt to humanize his client. It backfired spectacularly. Under cross-examination, Victoria's mask of sophistication cracked completely. Faced with the evidence of her crimes, she lashed out with the entitled fury of someone who'd never been held accountable for anything. "That woman destroyed my relationship with Adrian," she snapped, pointing at Sophia. "She came from nothing, had nothing to offer him except her pathetic sob story, and somehow convinced him she was worth more than everything we'd built together." "And what had you built together, Ms. Pemberton?" Prosecutor Santos asked calmly. "A dynasty, a merger of two great families, a partnership that would have been worth billions." Victoria's voice rose with each word. Instead, he chose her, some nobody lawyer who couldn't even avoid getting fired from her first job. The ugly classism and racism in her words hung in the courtroom air like poison. Several jury members looked visibly disgusted. "So you felt entitled to destroy her to get him back?" "I felt entitled to remove an obstacle to my happiness." Victoria's composure shattered completely. "Do you know what it's like to lose everything to someone so far beneath you? Someone who doesn't even understand the world she's trying to enter?" "I understand it perfectly," Sophia said quietly from the gallery, her voice carrying in the stunned silence. "Because you tried to make me lose everything to someone far beneath me." The judge gavelled for order, but the damage was done. Victoria had revealed exactly who she was, a woman so consumed by entitlement and prejudice that she'd corrupted federal systems to get her way. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts, Victoria's scream of rage echoed through the courtroom as the judge read the verdict. Guilty of conspiracy to commit bribery, guilty of obstruction of justice, guilty of wire fraud, guilty of conspiracy to violate civil rights. The defendant is remanded into custody pending sentencing, Judge Williams announced. Sentencing will occur in 4 weeks. As federal marshals led a hysterical Victoria from the courtroom, Sophia felt a weight lift from her chest that she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. It was over. Finally, completely over. Outside the courthouse, they faced a wall of reporters and cameras. Mr. Morrison, Miss Chen, how does it feel to have justice served? Adrian stepped forward, his arm around Sophia's waist in a gesture that was both protective and proud. Justice wasn't just served for us today, he said, his voice carrying clearly over the crowd. It was served for everyone who's ever been targeted by those who think wealth and power put them above the law. My fiancé and I are grateful that the system worked as it should. Fiancé. The word sent a thrill through Sophia's chest. He'd proposed 3 days ago on the same pier where they'd found each other again, with a ring that wasn't the largest or most expensive, but was chosen specifically for her. A vintage Art Deco design that spoke to her love of old movies and classic literature. Miss Chen, what would you say to other victims of similar attacks? Sophia stepped forward, her voice steady and strong. I'd say that your worth isn't determined by other people's opinions or actions. That justice might be slow, but it's real. And that sometimes the best revenge is building a life so good that your enemy's attempts to destroy you only make you stronger. As they walked away from the courthouse hand in hand, Sophia reflected on the journey that had brought them here. 6 months ago, she'd been a desperate woman accepting a devil's bargain. Now she was walking toward a future built on mutual respect, genuine love, and the hard-won knowledge that some things really couldn't be bought or sold. Behind them, the courthouse steps emptied as reporters chased other stories and the machinery of justice ground onto its next case. Ahead of them lay a life they would build together, not through contracts or arrangements, but through the daily choice to love each other without conditions. The terrifying part wasn't that the showdown was over. The terrifying part was how beautiful the rest of their story promised to be.